Welcome to tonight's forum. Glad you could make it. So, I want to just take a minute to welcome you to this Providence City Council Candidate Forum for Ward 13. Thank you all for being here and for staying engaged in our local elections. My name is Mwangi Gitahi, and I am a proud resident of South Providence and also a reporter, a writer for the Providence Eye. This event was organized and is being moderated by the Providence Eye. Please consider checking out what we do at pvdi.org, and consider subscribing to support our continued work. As you can see from the banner, we cover a wide range of topics centered around Providence. Subscriptions are free, and you can easily sign up on the clipboard being passed around. Can anybody hear me? Okay?
A little bit of feedback.
Okay. I'm just gonna scoot over here. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the 8th of 11 forums being operated by the Providence Eye across the city in the lead up to the primaries. Information about additional forums and voting in this primary is also available on our website, so please help spread the word to your friends, co-workers, and the greater community outside of your neighborhood. We'd also like to thank Federal Hill House for lending us this wonderful space and for helping make this important community conversation possible. Finally, we want to thank all the candidates for attending this event and for making it easier for voters to make informed decisions about the choices in this election. So I just want to take a minute to introduce the candidates. Starting to my immediate right is Annajane Yolken, Democrat, and then to her right is Connor Blier, Democrat, and they're running for an open seat in this ward. So the first set of questions for tonight's forum was developed from approximately 200 resident surveys in which voters identified their most pressing concerns for the city as a whole and for their individual neighborhoods. Candidates were informed in advance of the general topics that would be covered, but they were not given specific questions. The forum will begin with opening statements, followed by prepared questions, a brief period of audience questions, and then closing remarks. Before we begin, we just have a few quick house rules to go over. Candidates will each have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer each question, with time being monitored by John up front. The timekeeper will hold up a piece of paper, a clipboard, indicating when there are 30 seconds remaining. That will be the only indicator of how much time is left. And I won't actually say anything, so it'll just be up to you to see it. That will be, when the time is expired, the timekeeper will raise their right hand to signal that the candidates and the moderator that the time is up. And once your time has expired, you will be cut off by the moderator. We ask the candidates refrain from direct attacks on their opponents and instead focus on what makes them individually a strong candidate. So no heckling, no throwing tomatoes, and what they would bring to the office. We also ask the candidates to avoid speaking over one another. Interrupting or speaking out of turn makes it more difficult for voters to hear the information they need to make an informed decision. Additionally, we ask the audience to avoid heckling or making remarks throughout the forum so that all candidates have the opportunity to fully share their platforms with voters. Residents or candidates who fail to follow these rules may be asked to leave the event early. So now that we've covered the guidelines, we are ready to get started. So we're going to give each candidate 1 minute for opening remarks, and we encourage the candidates to please use this time to introduce yourself and to explain why you are running. And I'm going to get started right here with Annajane.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Okay, awesome. Hi everyone, my name is Annajane Yolken, and I work in overdose prevention and social services. And through that work, I have really had a front row seat to our city's affordability crisis. I have also helped pass and implement laws I've really seen save lives here in our state, including the first in the nation authorization of an overdose prevention center. So I know we can do big things at the local level. I've helped bring people together to help make some of those things happen. And I think that energy is needed now more than ever, and that's the spirit I want to bring to City Hall to represent our neighborhood on topics like affordability, the return of our public schools to local control, and our sidewalks. So thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Connor Blier. I might have called some of you personally in this room already. I apologize in advance. I'm leaving phone number calls on every phone number in the ward if I can. My family has been here for 3 generations. I don't say that in a way where I mean to be abrasive. I just mean to say it in a way that I know our history. For those of us who have met their spouse or fiance or significant other at Barry's Disco, that's my uncle. Most people over 50 will know that location, and you hear laughing in the crowd. We've been here for some time. I am running for this race because for 2 terms, 8 years, nearly a decade now, a lot of people who have been here for some time know that there has been a history of a lack of accessibility to our local representation. The city council role is the most basic of roles. It is for the simple things every day that a lot of people struggle with. That is the first line of defense when city services fail. I personally believe that good policy comes from being available to those folks when types of things like that come up, and I felt like that has not been happening, and that it has been leading to people who are excited to write policy that don't accurately represent the needs of the folks who live in those communities. So I am running to try to reverse that role and bring that voice back to the community.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we're ready to move into the questions created using the resident surveys. The first question, and this is I'm going to start with you, Connor, and then we'll just alternate with each question, if that's okay. The Providence Eye has reported on the arts and other development in the Valley District. What would you do to make sure this new development creates jobs and affordable units accessible to current ward residents?
Yeah, well, I think development is good in general. We have a huge housing shortage right now. So for me, one of the most interesting things to see when we were talking about some of these new policies was some of the biggest developers who have pulled hundreds of permits go up and speak on record that they were going to pull those permits. So I first would want to make sure that folks who are doing building for affordable housing are correctly interested in fixing the issue here locally, because we need more housing. Secondly, I think that building should be done by local workforces. I think that infrastructure building by design just brings more jobs. A huge part of Rhode Island, particularly Providence's economy, is actually infrastructure. We don't have a Wall Street or anything like that. Housing is a massive part of our economy, so I want to make sure that we're protecting that. And lastly, I know that this is affordable housing, but structurally, we haven't actually created a great reservation system to how we actually hand that affordable housing out. Right now, students could qualify from that who are coming from out of state to go to Ivy League educations, who have high parental incomes. I think that the folks who maybe should be having access to that are particularly folks who create the parts of our community that we preserve, first responders, nurses, and particularly the artist community. I've heard a lot is getting pushed out. So for me, I think create jobs, build infrastructure, protect development, develop more, make sure it's affordable, but also preserve the affordable housing for folks who maybe need it most, and create an order as to who gets it and why. I think there's tremendous benefit to that, particularly when you have first responders who are living in the areas that they serve. I know that some of our firemen are on food stamps.
Okay, thank you.
So right before I came to this forum, I was on the phone with a voter, and we were talking about what an amazing asset the Valley Arts District is, how much potential it is, and we were also talking about how we feel like the Creative Reuse Center, which just moved there, embodies everything we want to see from Ward 13. It's creative, it's accessible, it's affordable. And so I think that this is a really important topic as we're thinking to make sure we're including all aspects of our ward and thinking about the vision for it going forward. So I know that there are buildings in the Valley Arts District that have had designated units for artists. sort of the model, like a work-live model like exists at AS 220. Some of those are getting phased out. They had a certain number of years and that time is up. And so I think as we're looking about developing the Valley Arts District, which has so much potential and it can be such an amazing destination for our city, for our state, I think looking to make sure that we are really designating some of those units for artists is really important. I think about when I moved to the ward 12 years ago, so many people I know lived here were artists because they could afford to live here, and now they can't. So I think we really need to build that out because it's such an important part of our culture and because of our an important part of our economy.
Thank you very much. The second question, what specifically would you support to help Providence residents deal with the price of housing in the city? And we'll start with you, Annajane.
Absolutely. So you all won't be surprised to hear that when I'm door knocking, the cost of living is the most common thing that I hear about. And in a place like Ward 13, where the majority of people are renters, for people, that is the cost of rent. When I moved to Providence, or when I moved to Ward 13 12 years ago, my rent was under $300 a month. And now I talk with people and their rent went up by $1,000 last month. So I am for rent stabilization. I think we do need to do something about the cost of rent. I also recognize that it's an incredibly important, detailed, and nuanced piece of policy that I think needs to be done really thoughtfully. There's over 180 jurisdictions that have implemented rent stabilization. So I know that we can look at those and we can find something that works for Providence. I think we need to do many other things for the cost of housing as well, building more housing, making it easier for entities to develop housing, and we can talk more about that. But we do need a multi-pronged approach, and I do think that does need to include something to address the cost of rent.
Awesome. I would also agree cost of living is one of the most important things that's coming up in the conversations that I'm having today. I think this is a global issue that's felt especially in Providence right now with the 35,000 people who have moved here in the last 2 decades. This is an area where I think knowing history actually modifies and impacts how people write policy in our area. 85% of our housing, if you look at the housing in Ward 13, is multifamily properties. The vast majority of those aren't owned by large private equity firms. They're owned by locals, many of which are sitting in this room right now. The reason why I talk about history and why it matters is because we have a lot of folks running around getting mad at home ownership when I have personally knocked plenty of doors of folks who are homeowners, who are also people who would lose their home, their housing, if they lost their job within a few years. And this is why it matters to know the details of the history here, because Providence has fundamentally been a place that has been a working class location where it's a starter city where people can buy their homes. And that's why so many people have loved to live here, have been here for generations. So we had 6 decades of attrition. We have 2 decades of a ton of people who have moved here. I think that we do need to write policy that helps protection from gouging rent. I'm actually open to versions of rent control as long as it correctly classifies PE firms versus local housing owners. And I truly believe that the recent version of it failed. A perfect example of this is that it included LLCs. Tons of local class working families have their homes in LLCs for insurance and protection reasons. People don't know this because they're not in the community owning multis and dealing with, like, there's a video on my Instagram where the barbershop is an LLC. They came from the projects. They wouldn't be a PE firm.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll stay with you, Connor, for this third question. What would you do to support small businesses in the ward facing rising commercial rents?
Sure. Well, that lets me continue my line of thought. So the situation I was just talking about, there is a family from Puerto Rico that has their home they bought in 2009. They've had to take out a second loan due to the recent unprecedented tax hikes that we have. Many of us in this room are aware that the tax hikes we just have were the most, I believe, on public record. And Providence gets that from its housing costs, right? So the example that I've been discussing, those folks have had to take a second loan on their house, people from the projects, as they described it themselves. And so they're struggling. That's a small local business. That's my barbershop. It's on my Instagram. You can take a look. So I think the first thing requires us talking to our neighbors. The policy that was about to pass would treat them as a private equity firm. I think that's the exact type of situation we need to preserve. I don't think taxes can keep going up. I don't think a lot of our neighborhood can sustain another tax hike that's representative of what we've just experienced. And I think that we need to create more opportunity. It's something I've heard a lot is that there's so many vacant spaces that represent opportunities for small businesses to maybe enroll in programs. The Providence, the Armory building on Cranston Street has been vacant for so long. I personally called Scout, which was one of the groups that was interested in redeveloping. They were going to have the towers reserved for small businesses. They can be for artists as well. For example, the studios that they're losing. That would be a potential program that could bring locations back that's currently falling into, disarray. And that building has not really been sustained or used for a period of time. That's out of state funds.
Okay, thank you.
So our small businesses are one reason that I think people really love to live in Ward 13. And it's really, really hard to operate a small business. I think about conversations I've had with someone like Jen, whose rent in her small business went up by 36%, and she had to move, which was incredibly disruptive for her business. So we need to do more to support our small businesses. I know that we can make our city services more accessible for small businesses, so they're not going to many different offices or different buildings or different websites. I also know that in a small state like Rhode Island, a lot of this work is done at the state level. And I'm very committed to working with our state delegation to do the work to support small businesses. I have strong relationships with them. I'd love to leverage that to make sure that we're supporting our small businesses. And also, at the end of the day, small businesses are supported by workers, right? Like, we need to make sure that people can afford to live in the city, that they feel good about sending their kids to the public schools. All of these things that we can do ultimately will support our small businesses, which I think not only supports our economy, but it also creates a level of community that I think is so important and so unique in Ward 13.
Thank you, Annajane. So the next question has to do with code enforcement. How would you speed up code enforcement response times for absentee landlords? And we'll stay with you, Annajane.
So code enforcement is such an important issue. I've talked to so many people who have had negligent landlords, and they have had so much trouble getting code enforcement out. I spoke with one person who, her building could not get warm enough in the winter. It was really a health hazard. I see a solution as hiring more code enforcement officers. The code enforcement department is actually revenue generating for the city. So I see it as a win-win to have more in code enforcement so that we can really make sure we're protecting the quality of our buildings, the health of tenants, and also that we are not, it will be a financially viable thing as well.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that it goes revenue positive. So in a scenario where I think that we can't keep raising taxes, if that's true, then I would be perfectly comfortable doing that. I also think that this role that we're currently discussing, City Council, is supposed to be the first line of defense. I think this goes beyond just the control of, making sure that your homes are in all livable and habitable condition. I actually had to go through this. I had a bat come into my house like this week. I called RIDA, I called animal control, I called all of the representation of folks who need to come in and actually look at the bat, get it out. Half of them told me to open the window, half of them told me not to. I know this is ridiculous, but it was insane. It took me days as a homeowner to try to get a bat out of my house following the correct procedure. I just think that the person who should be picking up the phone in that scenario, if someone needs help, is your city councilor, right? Whether it's a pothole or a bat, honestly. And I feel like a lot of folks would love for that voice to come back. So I think part of control actually comes to the first line of defense of this person being accessible. I think that, if it is truly a positive revenue investment for the city, I think that doesn't raise taxes. That's totally fine. And I also think that the tax incentive programs maybe should shift a little bit, which is a different subject, but I know that we're giving some tax bailouts to folks who own lots of property that maybe aren't using those in ways to actually take care of the places that they have. I would much rather see those invested into small landlords or homeowners, because I think by changing that design, we'd actually see a better maintenance of our housing stock in the first place.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Connor. So our next question has to do with public safety. What public safety concerns have you heard most from constituents, and how would you address them? And we'll stay with you, Connor.
Sure. So this one I find really interesting, and I think this comes back to folks who have been here for some time, is we used to see heroin needles right by 7 Stars, for those of us who have been here for, I don't mean that in an abrasive way. A lot of people are moving here. It's a good thing, right? Providence has finally become a place that's a nice place to live. 35,000 people have moved here in 2 decades. That's an indicator of that. That's great. We want to keep that coming. So welcome to everybody new who's moved here. I do think it's also important to remember what I just said is we used to have heroin needles that were a few houses outside of 7 stars. So for me, I want to make sure that we are continuing moving in the progress that we have made. I think it's a delicate balance between fixing an area up and also making sure it's affordable for people to still live there. And I know that this is silly, I've been bashed about this a lot, but community policing, I really do like the idea of community policing. We just talked about making sure the affordable housing that's coming up should be reserved for first responders, police, people who are serving the community. There's so many studies that show if these folks are able to build relationships with and live next to the folks that they serve, that, it creates better protection, better safety. It's proven. So I'd really like to be able to enforce policy like that. And the last thing I'll say, which is really silly, I've gotten beaten up about it a lot. I love horseback police. I think I've seen them around Federal Hill. It's a historic place. We have some of the oldest housing stock in the country. I'd much rather see my neighbor cop living 2 blocks from me on a horse as we walk around with our puppies, if people are comfortable with it, than sitting in an unmarked vehicle.
I believe that everyone has the right to feel safe in their neighborhood, and I've definitely spoken with neighbors who don't feel safe in their neighborhood. I have heard some of this really concentrated around Owls Avenue at certain times of night as well. And in my work in overdose prevention, I work at a nonprofit called Project Weber Renew. We really partner very closely with the police, where we see our role as taking work off the police's plate so that they can focus on doing real police work. So by offering overdose prevention overdose interventions, by offering a cool place for someone to be so they're not in the heat, which makes people very aggravated, we are providing these services so police can focus on police work. And I really see there to be more opportunities for us to come together and think holistically and comprehensively about public safety. So again, we can free up the resources of our public safety officers to do what they have to do. And I really think that that will be important as we think about building a community where everyone feels safe.
Thank you, Annajane. Next question has to do with the liquor license. Some Federal Hill and Atwells Avenue residents say late night 2 a.m. liquor licenses have shifted the neighborhood from a dining destination towards a club scene. Do you support limiting late night licenses here? And we'll stay with you.
So I've had many conversations with neighbors around Atwells Avenue on places like Federal Street, D. Pascal Avenue, who are really concerned about what's happening on Atwells Avenue. And I also feel very much that a license is a privilege, not a right. And if an entity is not upholding what they are supposed to do by that license, then we have the right to go through the channels and have that license taken away. But really, a lot of what I've done in my career is bring people together, and I think we need to work both with the neighbors and the residents who, as a city councilor, those are the people I'd be representing, right? And the businesses to find a solution that works for everyone. Because what is happening right now is not working for everyone. Atwells Avenue is such an amazing world-class destination that we're really lucky to have in Ward 13, but we also need to make sure that it's happening for the residents. And if the residents feel like the certain hours or the certain parameters of licensure is not working for them, then we need to listen to that, and we do need to make sure that their voices are heard and that action is taken.
Yeah, so this is a hot potato issue. I've spoken to lots of folks who live in the neighborhood that are upset, particularly around the weekend scenarios where those streets are all getting shut down. They have one-ways, they can't get to their homes, they wake up and the neighborhoods are in disarray. Those are valid concerns. I think speaking with the neighborhood is a great response to that. I think that's something that we can certainly improve on. I also have spoken with 5 different local businesses in that area so far, a shoe store, and I've spoken with OPA, I've spoken with a lot of those folks, and it's interesting because it is a really complicated scenario. A lot of those businesses, particularly the guild shutting down Atwells for the night, has actually brought a lot of those folks business that they're really happy about, and some of them have lost business. So I think it's complicated. I guess to say, I think we need to talk to those folks a little more, because I've heard really valid concerns on both sides. I don't think it's fair for any neighbor to be waking up at 2 a.m. with glass being thrown around, destroying their street, and not having access to city service to clean that. I don't think that that's fair. So I would agree that some variation of modification needs to be had. I think it needs to be had by speaking to local businesses and the community, because there are neighbors that are against it, there are neighbors that like it, there are businesses that are for it and businesses that are against it. But waking up with the streets destroyed is just not, I think, a fair outcome of what we're currently doing.
Thank you, Connor. We're going to go back to public safety for our next question. How would you address public safety concerns specifically surrounding federal agency overreach and police community relations in the ward?
So we're speaking about ICE specifically. Yeah. This is a really tough one. For me, I find it interesting. A lot of people talk about city council role and what they can fix for their neighborhood. I want to be very clear. I love that this is a question that has been asked by the community. I want to be honest and direct with all of you. I can't fix that. I'm sure that's not what a lot of us want to hear, but it's the truth, right? This is a federal organization. I am very upset with it. I have lots of Spanish neighbors. I am relatively bilingual. My barber has had some run-ins and scenarios that have been very uncomfortable for them. The best thing that I can do is be available and take calls. I can't do much beyond that. There are networks of help that are non-political that I can bring access to folks for making sure that they can create sighting alerts when they're in the neighborhoods. I can speak to them directly. I've seen videos of some local politicians express how they feel about that. But if we're looking for this role to get involved in federal level politics, this is part of the reason why I'm running. This is a local level role. This is for potholes, street cleaning, tree pruning, and the stuff that's been unfortunately vacant in some areas of our ward for quite a long time. I would assume that everybody in the room shares very familiar opinions about what's happening in our country and how terrible it is. I also can't promise you that I can fix that. That's not my job. I'm your garbage man, unfortunately. So I hope that that's okay.
So I really feel ICE is a big concern in our neighborhood. I have spoken with neighbors. I remember speaking with one guy, and he's a citizen. He's Latino, and he was saying how he is terrified to leave his house because he is worried about being picked up by ICE. And even though he's a citizen, he's like, they will just do whatever they want. So now he orders everything, all his groceries online, and he hasn't left his house, much because of this. So I am very grateful for what we have done at the city level to protect our neighbors from being kidnapped by ICE, both through the city council and the mayor's office, to make it very clear that Providence police cannot collaborate with ICE and our other federal agencies that are doing ICE's bidding right now. And I think that ICE will continue to evolve. And so we as a city and as the legislative body of the city would also need to continue to evolve. I agree that there's a lot that needs to be done outside of city government. I think about things like the Deportation Defense Line, which does such amazing work to inform our neighbors about when ICE is in the community so people can mobilize. And again, that is outside of city government. It should be outside of city government. But I think there's also a role of an elected official to amplify that work so that we can keep our community safe.
Thank you, Annajane. Now moving on to the public school district. Now that the Providence Public School District has returned to local control, what would be your top priority for schools serving this ward?
Absolutely. So I feel as a city government, supporting our children, supporting youth, supporting students, and supporting teachers is one of our biggest obligation. And right now we are at a critical juncture with the schools going back to local control. I really see the role of the city council is making sure that the schools are fully funded and that those dollars are being used appropriately and that they are going to the classrooms so that they can support students and teachers in their learning. I also think it's important to think about what the role of the city council is not. So for folks who read the Johns Hopkins report, one of the critiques of the Providence public school system is that there's too many cooks in the kitchen, right? And so when we have this return to local control, a lot of the work is empowering the school board so that they can really govern, which they haven't had the opportunity to do in many years, and especially with this hybrid elected appointed model. And so I see the role of city council as also making sure that the school board has what they need to govern. I think there's also a role for city council to celebrate students and celebrate teachers that are in the district. I think sometimes that gets overlooked, but there's so much amazing work happening, and I see a local elected official as having a role in being able to do that.
Yeah, the education system is something I'd really like to be able to support with. It's an interesting fact that it's $23,500 per annum, roughly, per child in the Providence school system, and we have some of the worst statistical performance. When you look at neighboring areas, it's like, I think it's 13,000 for Barrington, which I know is a terrible comparison. Obviously, it's a very different ecosystem there, but there's many versions of that. It's really expensive and they have different outcomes. So for me, I don't think that we can raise taxes more, but I also think they need more resources at the same time. I think our teachers are tremendously underpaid. I think they don't have what they need to run their school systems and their programs. My mom was a public school teacher, so my also cousin works in the West Warwick public school system. She does not make enough, so I feel that pain. And I just don't think that the solution can come from more taxes. So the only thing that's left is to get more efficient, right? My background is doing math at massive scale. I'm sure many of you have seen some of that budgetary finance wizard stuff that I've done. I'd really like to bridge the gap between the missing finance relationship in the city council and the finance committee. It's been disjointed for some time. I know that's just kind of unfortunately how it is. I would like to fix that, right? So if we can't raise taxes and we need to get more efficient, then we need someone who can work from a finance perspective and bridge the gap between the finance committee to make more sense of the dollars that are being spent, so we get better outcomes with the money that we're currently spending, which right now I think would be a really easy barrier to entry because it's so low.
Thank you, Connor. For next questions, you've kind of touched on this already, but we'll ask it anyway. In your opinion, what is the role of a city councilor, and what specifically will you do to ensure your success? We'll start with you, Connor.
Yeah, I love this question. I think this role is brutal. Rachel, I know you're sitting in the room. Thank you for your service. I mean no disrespect. I think that there are two different parts of this role, and they're very clear to me. I think that there is policy writing and big picture stuff, which is important. I also think that there's taking up the phone when someone calls and they have simple, mundane stuff that needs to get done and city services fail. For me, both are important. I would like to reverse the order of the two in my perspective from what I've heard indoors. I want to make sure that when your garbage cans get taken and they don't get replaced and you're afraid of rats breaking into your home because you're piling up on trash, you have a number to call that makes sure that that gets fixed for you. I want to make sure if you have a pothole in your neighborhood that is broken your rim on your tire, which happened to my barber, that it's been there for over 6 months, which is Rhode Island, unfortunately how it is, that gets fixed for you. I want to make sure if your storm drains haven't been cleaned and your street is flooding, that gets fixed for you, right? And so today, a lot of neighbors feel that that's not getting fixed for them. And I think the byproduct of that is that we have policy that's getting written that's being prioritized over people that's not representative of the needs of the folks that actually live here. And I think policy is fun to write. I think it's a great way to build careers. It's a great way to help your community. But unfortunately, if we're not passing policy that changes the way that we live, and we're also failing to take those calls, we're both failing the fundamental needs of our neighbors and writing things that don't represent their needs because we haven't been speaking with them. So for me, I want to put people over policy. I think that's the most important part of this role. It's the first line of defense for the neighborhood.
Thank you, Connor.
I really see the role of a city councilor as being someone's conduit, someone's entry point into city government. That's such an important thing in this moment where there's so much mistrust with government, and we have a federal government that's run by cruelty and hate. And like Connor was saying, it goes into two parts. There's the policy piece, and then there's the constituent service side. On the policy piece, I've had a lot of experience helping pass bold policies at the state level, and I would love to bring that experience to City Hall to pass policies to make sure we are addressing the needs of our neighbors. And on the constituent service side, this is a little different, but I want to bring this experience. So I work at a nonprofit called Project Weber Renew. We do really stigmatized and misunderstood work around overdose. And in that work, we know we have to be so responsive to our neighbors. And I am often a person who receives this feedback and then either has to do something about it, or I have to find one of my colleagues to do something about it. our work is actually embedded in the city's 311 system. So I really feel like I have that muscle memory of receiving these requests and then having to address them. And while I understand it at a much smaller scale than a neighborhood level, that is the experience and also the expertise and the priority that I would bring to City Hall as well.
Thank you, Annajane. For our final prepared question, what would you most like to accomplish at the end of your term if elected? And we'll stick with you, Annajane.
So what I'd like to accomplish is, if I were to be elected at the end of my term, people feel like local government has their back. And I think that can really happen in so many different ways. I would love, for example, to work on policy to get rid of our flock cameras so we don't feel like we're being surveilled as we are going around our city, or as we have immigrant neighbors who are worried about dropping their kids off to school. I would also like to work on neighborhood projects that we feel like we can grow this pride in this amazing neighborhood that we have, that we can work together, we can come together as a community, and we can really celebrate where we live and all the people who live here. So again, it goes back to that working on policy and working on the neighborhood needs that I'd really love to bring to this neighborhood, and that we feel like Providence and this ward is a place where people can afford to live, they feel welcome here, and also they feel safe here.
I think success in 4 years is knowing the majority of the people's names who are sitting in this room. Calls are taken, and that's where getting to know your neighbor starts, through the mundane stuff. So for me, success is much simpler. I don't feel as a city councilor as the first line of defense for the most mundane stuff that I can create massive impact. And for me, massive impact is actually built, I think, through relationships, through the simple things, and at scale that has measure. There are a lot of folks here who are upset about the simple things, and for me, if I can fix that, that's enough. I have lived here my entire life. I truly care about this community. It's funny, someone got upset with me because I was going to some of the elderly patient homes, and they were telling me that I don't care about those. My grandfather passed away in one of those a couple of years ago, right? This is my home, and I would like to restore the conduit, as we've discussed, between the local community of folks here, their needs in City Hall, and I just want to take the calls. That's it. That's really all I want to do, is be available to the folks who need the simple things. So for me, that's what success looks like, and I truly, to bring it back to the original piece, I'm not excited about policy. I'm excited about doing those things, and I think good policy comes from those things. I think the mishap on writing a massive piece of policy that was supposed to protect our communities but actually subjugated someone from the projects who happened to be a homeowner is a great example of the fact that the policy that's being written is not representative of our needs. So I'd like to restore the needs.
Thank you, Connor. So that does it for our prepared questions. We're going to transition now to audience questions. So what I'm going to ask is that if you do have a question, please raise your hand and I will call on you. And then please come over to the front, because we'll need to share the mic that I'm using, so we get to practice sharing tonight. Please also keep your questions directed at both candidates. If not, I'll have to reframe that so that they both have a chance to answer the questions. And that's it. So, questions? Yes, with the black shirt. And I just want to mention that the candidates have a minute and 30 seconds to answer each question.
Thank you. Hello. It's nice to see you both. My name is Melanie, and I just want to circle back to what I think you both know is a very passionate place for me, and that is the community in between Broadway and Spruce Street. You touched on some policy and some conversations that you've had with both the residents and the businesses. My thoughts are wrapped around quality of life issues. So rats and trash and traffic and noise, these are very high priority for our neighbors. Now, we recognize that small businesses are an integral part of our community. And my question to you is, how would you bridge the gap between both the residents and the businesses?
Do we both answer these in a minute and 30 seconds?
Yes, and I'm going to start with you because I believe you finished. Oh, you said, okay, yeah, so we'll go with you first.
Okay.
Yes, a minute 30.
Sure. Well, first, I do want to point out that I recognize that there's a disparity between certain areas of our ward. I personally walked around like Parenti Villa recently, for example, and I am personally very frustrated with how that area has been managed. I don't think it's any individual's fault. I think that City Hall is a big mechanism, and the systems that fix it and function through it are very difficult to navigate and get incentivized to do their job. I've actually worked in government before, ironically. I haven't brought this up, but I worked at government-owned facilities for years. It's a disaster. It's really hard to do. But I think, again, I would take it back to taking calls as kind of where the solution starts. And I think it's a thankless job. I don't think, I've said this many times, I think you can take 99% of calls and try to fix them, and the 1% that you fail makes 100% of your job terrible. But the good news with me is I'm good at getting yelled at. So I think it starts by being available, just by having thick skin, and by being the customer service role of the community for people who are upset with things that probably has nothing to do with you, and being consistent and trying to get that fixed. And secondly, that's opening one line of communication, but I think building the neighborhood back together is important too. I was telling a story about a local person who was upset about that event, and I said, you should go speak to them. This is someone who is upset about that event. You should learn about it from them firsthand. And they got mad at me and they said, did you have their consent to tell me to go talk to them? And I told them, you don't need consent to speak with your neighbor, right? And so I think that we need to fix that mentality. And I think that can start through, also recurring sessions of office hours.
Melanie, I know we've talked about this. I've talked about this with so many neighbors as well. And one thing that I really have found doing work in Rhode Island is that we all know each other, right? And a lot of this work is built through building trusting relationships. And once we have trusting relationships, that's really where we can come together and find solutions that work for everyone. Again, that is something I have experience doing. I have built a lot of trust with a lot of different people in city government, in state government, various different stakeholders to really come together around different issues. And I think it's about making sure that people do feel, again, like trust is built through action. Trust takes time to build. And that when we reinforce that and when we show that through our actions, then we can work together and move things forward. So I do think it's a bit about relational organizing in this way and what you're talking about. But it's really about showing up, being consistent, following through, and being genuine about having a shared goal to make sure that our neighborhood feels good for us and feels good for the residents who are living there, to make sure that businesses are good faith partners, that they are doing what they can to clean up in front of their buildings, and that we are really working together as a community to build a neighborhood that we want to live in.
Thank you. Did I see a hand here earlier? Were you going to ask a question? Yeah. Do you want to come up and then?
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. My name is Christina, and I live in Ward. I've been here around this neighborhood about 10 years, and before lived in Rhode
Can you
Island
speak in the
for 20 years, and graduated from URI and so forth. So I know the state, I know the city, I know public education and so forth. And I have a question. When you talk about policy, you said you've done things with bold policies. I didn't hear you say anything specific about anything that you did, like building relationships and so forth. Like, I want to bring up, here's something I want to find out. If you're working with the homeless, and I have to say, I worked as a volunteer with the homeless in New York. I lived in senseless killing neighborhoods in New York, and what is being done to get the homeless people off of drugs? Not just save their lives. I've had people pass out on the street, and I called a number, and I had to take my bus, and I don't know if they lived or not. And this is like right in our little neighborhood, and a nice part, in the West End. Like, what is being done there? And are you thinking about not just the homeless people, but I have very aggressive panhandlers when I'm trying to get on the highway, and they are, if people stop and give them money, they're causing a traffic jam. It is hard enough to drive. There are accidents every day. So what is being done, besides hopefully getting them better homes, to have those people also be good neighbors, because I worked with a lot of homeless people who were good neighbors, who were clean, who were polite, who just could not afford New York City. So you're very vague about who these neighbors are and who's taking care of who. You seem to be speaking from the level of someone who is from a sort of a higher level and doesn't really have an understanding of small business owners, immigrants who worked hard to buy their homes and have maybe a 3-unit home that they live in. And how can they control the rent if taxes on those kind of properties are so high?
I'll try to make this brief. I'm a volunteer for the Providence Noise Project, and one of the things we're asking all the candidates is how they would address noise issues in the city. The most prevalent source of noise that people report to us is vehicle noise, which is mostly modified mufflers and over-amplified stereos. But we also hear from folks that live near commercial entertainment venues, like bars, clubs, and restaurants, which Federal Hill has many of, and Ward 13 has many of. So it's kind of a two-part question. Would you either or both of you support doing something about modified mufflers, specifically not making it legal to sell or install them? They're not legal to use, but you're actually legally allowed to. A commercial business can install them and can sell them. And then secondly, I don't know if she's still here, but Councilmember Miller was instrumental in giving businesses the right to play amplified music as part of their separating from their liquor license. So would you guys seek to reverse that change in the city ordinance that gives them the right, since Melanie was talking about privilege and not right, to play amplified music that I think residents here are susceptible to? You, Connor, you mentioned that people wake up the next morning and there's stuff all over the streets, but a lot of people don't get to sleep the night before. And it was mentioned, Melanie mentioned before, that it's a quality of life issue, but we really stress that it's a public health issue because it does deprive people of sleep and all sorts of other impacts. So that's my question.
Yeah, the Federal Hill side to me is a really messy issue for a lot of reasons. The one that you're touching on now for noise control and complaints, I actually think that there's an opportunity to put decibel meter stations in. That's something that's been proposed and discussed a lot. I'm for that. I would assume most people are probably going to be for that. I think that's fine. And, ironically, I could be someone who gets in trouble by that, who needs to learn. I have a motorcycle, right? So it's not my intention to be loud or noisy, but when you take safety driving courses, specifically for motorcycles, they train you to rev your engine when you approach a stop, because most folks don't see motorcycles, they're not thinking about motorcycles, so people have this stigmatism against motorcycles that they're really loud and annoying, and of course they certainly are, right? But I'm totally aware of that all the time. And if I'm doing that at a time that's inappropriate, I think it's very fair to have mechanisms in place that ticket me to train me out of that behavior. And maybe I use it during the day and at night I drive my car, right? And I'm fine with that. I get hit already by the red light camera at the end of Broadway, and now I stop at every red light instead of doing a California roll. And it's been expensive, but I'm more than happy to pay for it if it improves the quality of life for my neighbors, because I think that's what those systems are for.
So I've definitely heard noise be a big issue, especially around Atwells Avenue. And as I mentioned before, I do think a license is a privilege, not a right. If an entity is not upholding their license, then there should be avenues for it being taken away. And the entertainment license the ordinance that you're talking about does have time restrictions, and it does not supersede our current noise ordinances. So I am for getting at some of these root causes of things that cause noise. Again, establishments that are being very loud, very supportive of things like the ban of gas leaf blowers, which cause a lot of noise, and there is no need that we need gas leaf blowers in 2026, so I'm really glad that those are being phased out. But I think whatever we can be doing to, again, address the root cause of some of these challenges, and also to make sure that we know our neighbors, so that when things are loud, we can go over to our neighbor's house and say, hey, can you please turn down the music, right? And to prevent things from being escalating. And I think that's also a part of just, being in community with each other.
Thank you, candidates. Okay, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for being here tonight. Corey Pills, resident of 497 Washington Street. We've talked a lot about quality of service issues or quality of life issues in the district, and I want to try to approach this in a different way, because I do think it's important that picking up the phone and hearing from constituents is the first step to it, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee an outcome. We have a mayor right now that ran on a platform of making Providence one of the best run cities. Those of us that live in the district see things very differently. We have a broken 311 system that you used to not be able to use on a mobile phone. Despite new trash barrels, we have trash accumulating on our streets. We have public safety issues in terms of pedestrians, traffic, parking, especially in my area where they've done a lot of development. So my biggest question is, how will you use your role to serve as a check on the mayor, whoever he may be, come the next election? And what levers of government are you going to pull that will be available to you on the city council to make a real impact on these quality of life issues? Because we have an executive right now that ran on this and is failing horribly in this ward. Thank you.
Thanks for raising that, Corey. I think a real challenge of some of these issues that you're raising are that they are under the mayor's, the executive branch. And there's things like DPW, 311 that are not in the city council purview. And so I really see the role of a city councilor as being an advocate, as being the person that's following up, as using entities like constituent service staffers who work in city council, and knowing who are the people within government who you can go to, because it makes sense that a city councilor can know that in a way that a constituent can't, right? Because people are living their lives and they shouldn't have to know that. And so really understanding who are the different people, who are the different players, and again, being that conduit to advocate for what people need to make sure these things are happening, even if they aren't under necessarily what a city councilor themselves can do. And I've seen people really be able to do that effectively.
So as an exercise a few weeks ago, we have a stop sign missing off a connector street of Broadway. I went through 311 and I called DPW and I spent a week trying to get that replaced. It's still not there. So I hear you, I get it. And I think that there's only two things that this role can do. I think one, you touched on in the beginning, which didn't feel like enough, but I would push back. I think that it's a really good first step, which is taking calls. I do think that that matters. I think a lot of folks in this room have felt that for nearly a decade, that their voice has gone unheard. And unfortunately, I don't think 311 and DPW works perfectly all the time. Like, that's just the case. A lot of folks have felt that. But this is the front line of defense role, and if this role is not taking calls and isn't pushing back and chasing those folks and holding them accountable because they've got a million things on their plate, of course those things are never going to get taken care of, right? So for me, I do think it is two steps. I think step one is certainly picking up the phone and being that front line of defense. I think that has to come back. I don't think either of us would disagree that that has been done to the level where everyone in this room is currently happy. I've heard it at 1 out of 4 doors. So I think that that has a huge impact. And I think second is being really good at hounding those folks to prioritize issues. We can't do it as civilians. Like I just tried doing it on 311 and DPW. I still can't get that sign fixed. So the only person who can do it is this role. That's it, right? So I think that's really where it starts and ends.
Thank you for the question. Yes, and then we'll come back to you.
Hi, my name's Steve Ardenti. I live at Grant Mill, 299 Carpenter Street, and I'm excited to hear both of you tonight, but I will be transparent. I think the ward and the city is heading in the wrong direction. It is too expensive to live here in Providence. When I moved to Grant Mill about 8 years ago, my rent was $1,300, now up to $2,800. It's expensive, and I'm fortunate in the sense that I'm able to afford it, but it is a private company. I'm really concerned because I think the city's heading in the wrong way. And I guess my biggest question, one of the things that frustrates me so much, and I've heard it from both of you tonight, is I feel as though this part of the west side of 95 often gets overlooked. I'm very involved in Ward 3's race right now, and everywhere you walk in their neighborhoods, it's pristine. And it may be the population that lives here versus there, but I think that we do not have a strong advocate right now in city council for us, transparently. And so I guess my question is, one, how would you address the infrastructure issue here? Sidewalks, I mean, I have a visual disability at night, I can't see well. I've tripped many times because the sidewalks are inaccessible and not, maintained. So one question was infrastructure, and then my second is just a really basic question is day one, which I don't think you'll be able to do it on day one, but day one, what's the first piece of legislation you put forth for the city council?
Awesome, two great questions. I just want to point out that you had someone who just stood up and said that in comparison to other wards, they feel that this one has not been prioritized for city services. So I just want to underline that we're hearing it in conversation. It's an uncomfortable thing to say. I don't mean it in disrespect, but it is true that it's happening here. So first is acknowledging that, making sure that we realize it's an issue. I also think it's centralized in certain areas of the ward. If you go over by Dexter Park is representative of the pristine places you've seen in Ward 3. It's perfect. It's immaculate, right? But that's not true for everywhere. And again, I truly am frustrated that if you go over to Parenti Villa, that Parenti Villa is an absolute mess. And that's housing for disabled, elderly folks. That's kind of messed up, in my opinion. So I apologize for the passion entering the mic, but I'm upset. Like, that's my foundation of running is because I am upset. I'm upset that someone is coming up and saying that in comparison to other wards that we have been unable to access our representation. We have had the areas of our neighborhood that I have been, a family to for an extended period of time is falling to pieces, and that people haven't been able to call and access and get that fixed. And what would I pass first for legislation? I wouldn't pass anything. I'm gonna pick up the phone. I will keep going down to that base point. The one thing I can do well is be available to fix that issue. And I guarantee you, in a year of doing that, I will find stuff through that experience of having issues with 311, having local issues with my neighbors that I'm taking phone calls for every day, where I say, hey, this could be done better because I've spoken with my neighbors. And that's when I have the privilege of writing policy, is after I've served them like that. Thank you.
So I'll answer the second part of your question first about the first piece of policy that I would introduce would be banning or canceling our contract with Flock. Is the first piece of the legislation that I would introduce. And then the second piece of city services, this is something that's really important to me. Specifically, the sidewalks are something that are incredibly important to me. When I decided to run for city council, I literally ran every single street within Ward 13. And like Connor was saying, there are many disparities within Ward 13 and many disparities in the sidewalks within Ward 13 as well. And so I've spoken with many current city councilors about how they go about prioritizing different sidewalks within the ward, making sure that they are aggregating what is necessary, making sure that there is a paper trail through things like 311 that show which places really need the most impact, and making sure that when there's funding available, which there is every year, and it varies with other things like federal dollars, there's a lot of COVID dollars as well, making sure that those are going to the places where they're needed most. And again, having the city council person be the aggregator for some of those things as well.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a resident of this ward and I'm a teacher in the public school district. My question for you is, so in this ward just recently, we nearly leased a public school building to a big box charter school, a corporate charter school who was well-resourced. And it seems that public schools are closing all across the city and new charter schools are popping up. So my question to you is, what is your position on charter school expansion? And what is your position on how that affects our public schools, especially as we go back to local control?
So I feel concerned about charter school expansion, and the reason I feel concerned about charter school expansion is really how the funding formula for our city works. It actually comes from the state level. So when we have students who go to charter schools, that is taking away resources from our Providence public schools. And really, our Providence public schools support most of the students. They support the students with disabilities, they support multilingual learners, and so it's really important that we are making sure that we have resources to be able to do that. And I think when you're talking about what happened with Carl Loro in particular, I followed that, and I've much more recently learned a lot more about what happened, but at the end of the day, I really feel that we should not be handing over the keys of city property to charter schools.
Yeah, so we talk about the formula, and I agree, I think the formula is broken. So right now, the specific issue with the formula is that if someone leaves a public school and goes to a charter school, but then falls out of that education system, they still get the tax dollars going to the charter school, even though that they have left. And so there's a bit of like a profitized way that folks look at this, because they're looking at kind of capturing kids. That sounds very villainous. They look at capturing kids' revenue, and they don't really look at the kid. And so for me, fundamentally, that's a problem. And I agree with that. I think that that's an issue. I also look at the origins of charter schools. Charter schools are public schools. The reason why they first came into place was because public schools were being run poorly, and they needed competition to try to lift the efforts of public schools that weren't charter, that were being run inefficiently, right? And so I think that that has existed and has worked, and there's merit to that in the past. So for me, I think if the formula is based on the performance of the kid and not the profit of the business, where option is allowed to exist, where teachers are paid fairly and kids have competitive options for education, I think if that's done right, I think it's okay. I think in the way it's being proposed right now, it needs modification. I would agree with that entirely. But I'll also finish this with, I spoke to 20 parents in this ward. I never brought up charter schools. I said, what do you care about? 19 of 20 said, we need options now. So for me, it's not my job to tell you what I think is right or wrong. It's my job to talk to folks with kids and say, what do you need? I don't think it's my right to tell folks with kids that the public schools are good enough for them. I think it's my job to help them fix the issue.
Okay, thank you. We're doing pretty well on time, so I want to make sure that all the questions have been asked. We've got about 15 more or so more minutes. So does anyone else have a question? Yes.
Thank you. CJ Miller, longtime resident of Ward 13. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sweet. Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. Trying to figure out how to word this subject. So, if it hadn't been for friends, really good friends of mine in the district, I would have likely been unhoused in the district. We looked for safety net after safety net, and there just wasn't one. I did move into the district after, when I was like 18, 19, after I aged out of foster care. And since then, the rents have risen, and it has become difficult to live in Providence, where I was born. And despite what some may think about homelessness and addiction, I'm not a drug addict, but I will say that I'm curious to know how you're going to prioritize housing affordability. And will you dispel some of those ignorant narratives about the homeless? And what will that look like under your leadership?
Sure. I think it's worth noting I took someone into my home this year. Granted, they were my family member who was unhoused, so I get it. I think it's really complicated. I think it's economics. We have a housing shortage here that's driving up costs fundamentally in our neighborhood, which is really unfortunate. And it's very hard to hear that for someone who's been here for an extended period of time, because you are the exact type of folks that we should be protecting. I think if you have 35,000 people move here in 2 decades after 6 decades of attrition where we've had no infrastructure building, it unfortunately drives up costs. It's not an opinion, it's just a fact. And so the only way to get out of that is to fix the supply and demand ratio. And around that we need protections, right? So a lot of the housing that we should be building should be high percentage based of affordable living for folks like you. That's what we need. We need more options of that for you. That also requires not scaring off investment from developers. We hear this whole thing about private equity and everybody freaks out. And private equity can be bad. It can buy up residential housing. Absolutely, that's bad. It drives up costs. But private equity can be good. Look at the building that's going up next to Odie's. It's a vacant lot. It's been there with nothing forever. And now that's affordable housing coming up because someone chose to invest in the state in a way that makes sense, that gives people options who need it. And lastly, I think it's correctly classifying housing of folks who are local small business residential owners in this neighborhood, because if those folks get priced out, which I'll remind everyone here, it's the majority of housing, PE buys those homes and turns them into condos and compounds the issue. So classification matters.
Thank you, CJ, for sharing about your experience, and I'm sorry that you experienced this in your home. So as you know, this is a really important issue to me, given the work that I do in terms of dispelling myths of folks experiencing homeless. That's important to me. The people who I work with and the clients who we serve are some of the greatest people I've ever met in my life, and I'm really, really honored to share space with them. But getting to the the housing piece, I think it requires a multi-pronged approach. This is a really, really tough issue, and we need all the solutions and all the tools in our toolbox. And I see some of those things being rent stabilization, making sure we're incentivizing affordable housing development, making sure that we are leveraging things like the 8 law, like federal dollars that are on the table, and also making sure that we are doing work to support our unhoused neighbors, whether they're in Ward 13 or whether they're across the city. And I think that there's a lot we can do at the city level to do those things. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
You got my vote, AJ.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Tara Baldrick-Maroney. Been in the ward for a little over 2 years now. So I appreciate you both being here. Thank you very much for sharing your answers to the questions that we've put to you and that have been put to you by others not in this room. As much as you're running for this one seat, your work is going to be with other people on the council, right? So I can appreciate, each of you saying, like, picking up the phone and things like this and people calling you, but it's also going to be a team effort. So I would like to hear maybe a bit more concretely about how you would work with other counselors, especially in a way that would benefit our ward. Thank you.
Hi there. I have a follow-up question about development. So I was looking up the property that's on 9th Street, the one that's being developed right on Westminster. That's actually being developed by a swap bank, which is a local nonprofit, and they did take about $8 million from the state to make that property happen. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about how you would partner with local nonprofits and partner with the state to bring about more affordable housing.
Yeah, that's great. So for me, I think one of the biggest areas of opportunity is actually our TSA program. So I don't know if anyone here in the room knows the name Dustin Dezou, but the guy should be wearing a cape. He's basically the supervillain of Providence housing. He has some of the most extreme eviction programs that have unhoused people in very unfortunate scenarios that are incredibly unfair. That's a perfect example of maybe someone we need better regulation and protection for. Unfortunately, the TSA program gave Dustin Dezou a $375,000 tax break for buying up residential homes by someone who is in this room with us tonight, which I think is important to note. So for me, when I'm trying to find out how I can better find revenue to work with programs that create affordable housing, I want to make sure that we're using, because it comes from taxes, right? Like, it's all about making sure we're making efficient investments with our taxes. That TSA program, based off of what I just said, is clearly broken. It should be going towards programs like that. It should also be going towards local homeownership. I feel like people villainizing homeownership is terrible. That's how working class enters into both being the middle class, right? And so I think we need programs for both. I need programs for more affordable housing, looking at tax incentives on how that happens, how the city can put that in directions that are supportive of those types of programs, like you just mentioned. And also local homeownership, because not everybody wants to rent forever. Some folks want to have retirement savings in 30 years, and that comes to buying an apartment.
Developing affordable housing should be one of our biggest priorities in the state right now, given our housing crisis. And developing affordable housing is a really complicated process that involves many different players, nonprofits like you talked about with SWAP. The SWAP building on 9th Street is interesting because it actually was going to be luxury, but then SWAP sort of took it over, and I think that's amazing. We can talk more about that. But it also can involve funding from the state as well, federal funding, many different funding streams that are braided together, which can get really complicated because you have to have all of them align. And also, a lot of that goes through Rhode Island Housing, right? That is the entity that is really overseeing and coordinating a lot of affordable housing things. And so as a city councilor, one doesn't necessarily have jurisdiction over Rhode Island housing. And also, I think it's important to understand how those processes work and knowing what are the levers at the city level, a lot of things around, zoning permits and things like that to try to speed up some of that development so that Rhode Island housing and entities of the state can do their work to try to develop more affordable housing.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. It's great engagement tonight.
Hi, my name is Chloe. I live like 2 blocks that way. So you both have spoken about, sort of the like cleaning up trash in the streets and other sort of public service things. I think one thing that I think about a lot, because I worked in, clean tech and climate science and stuff like that. I also live on a block that has maybe 2 trees, right? So, and I think there's huge disparities depending on where you are in the ward. And so I'm wondering if there are policy levers or other things that you see you could access in your position on city council that would help. Let me backtrack. So there's the trees, right? And then there's the fact that like here in Ward 13, like when we get heat waves, it's degrees warmer than it is over, on Blackstone Boulevard and where there's a lot of green space. I'm wondering if there are levers that you're excited about, like maybe more specifically, or policy things that you would try to push through to help us be more resilient against like these heat waves, climate change, and just, bring more green space and other sort of infrastructure to the ward that would help, us be more climate resilient in the long term.
So I think there's a lot we can do at the local level for climate resiliency. I think about projects like the flood park that's off of Eagle Street. I don't know if people know about the flood park. It's just in the corner of the ward. But basically the Woonasquatucket River is tidal. So when it also rains, it can really get bad. So they created this low-lying park that can absorb some of the water. So with our, drain systems aren't overflowing. So I'm very supportive of projects like that, these really local projects that we can do here in our neighborhood to be more resilient to climate change. I think the tree cover is another really important topic. And I think there's a lot of disparities even within the ward about the tree cover. I think about places like Major Park off of Ellery Street, which has very little shade, and compared to a place like Dexter Park. So there are a lot of really amazing programs. I think they're more on the programmatic side than the policy side that really promote tree planting as well. And I spoke with one person who lives in Ward 13 who he called me up and he's like, I helped plant over 400 trees in Ward 13. And so I think that, that's amazing. And I think that there's a lot that we can build from to really increase our tree cover, especially as we will just have more and more heat waves like we've experienced this summer.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm legally allowed to do this. Politics seems pretty convoluted, but at the time when my parents lived in Warwick, they planted rose bush trees, I think they're called, on the entire block that we grew up with. And I don't think they asked any city officials to do it. So I think part of this has to do with getting hands-on for tree planting. If that's allowed, I would love for that to be so, because that shouldn't be something that you have constraints around. I think you should be able to plant your own. But my street as well is a perfect example right off Broadway. Is I have 2 trees that have been missing. It is something I've actually called for in the past to try to get replaced. I've not been able to get help with it. So I think that also ties back to having access to city services to make sure that they're doing that. And that comes from a discretionary budget, by the way. This role sits on top of a discretionary budget where they can make choices as to where that money goes to give services. And again, I bring that back to the reminder that there is a disparity in where some of that is going. I think it's been great that we've rejuvenated the Dexter Park area. I think it's time to look outside of that and to rebalance some of the areas that are closer to the Federal Hill side. Most of those areas have no trees and they don't have shade coverage. So I think it's fair to create a balance.
Thank you. Thank you for the responses, and thank you all for your questions tonight. These are the most questions I've heard asked in any forum, so It's amazing how engaged you all are, and love the attendance too. So at this point, we're going to give the candidates an opportunity to give closing remarks, and they're each going to have 1 minute to make those remarks. And so we'll start with you, Connor.
Sure. So I know this is a delicate thing to say, but I hope that everyone in this room knows that I say it with my entire heart. This is my home. My family's been here for 3 generations. I care about this area very much. I am not doing this for an opportunity to build a career, to get deep into policy. I am doing this because I truly believe that the voice of our community has been lost. I think it's a thankless job. It's really tough, so it's easy for that to happen. And I think part of that comes with making a very simple choice of starting to prioritize people over policy. And that is something that I promise that I will do if I have the luxury to serve. I think this is the most mundane role. I think that's what this role should be doing. And I think if it is blessed enough to write policy, it needs to be stemmed from having done that. And I think having a history here and having generations of family here embedded in the community impacts how you understand the nature of where we live. That adds value. So as you all decide to come up and vote, I would just think about what you're looking to see changed in the community after the last 8 years as we move forward into this next term.
Through my career, I've really helped people and supported people during some of the toughest moments of their lives. And I found that when we come together with care and compassion for each other, that's really when our community's strongest. So that's really the spirit I want to bring to City Hall, should I be elected. To really work both on the policy side and on the constituent service side to make sure that our neighborhood feels cared for as well. I have loved getting to know so many people through this wild process of campaigning. I've knocked on so many people's doors, and what I've really found is that so many people love this neighborhood and they want to see it be even better. So I would love to work with people to really help make sure that this neighborhood is a place that we can all find safe, welcoming, and affordable.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you. Now, I just want to say, I want to thank the candidates for participating in tonight's forum and for taking the time to share your priorities, ideas, and visions for Ward 13 with the community. I think no matter who's elected, it sounds like you're going to be well represented. We would also like to thank everyone who attended tonight, both in person and those who continue to stay engaged in our local elections. Civic participation is essential to a strong community, and we really appreciate everyone who took the time out of their schedule to be here. A special thank you again to Federal Hill House for providing the space for this important conversation, and to everyone who helped organize and make tonight's forum possible. For those who would like to revisit tonight's discussion, a recording of this forum will be made available on our YouTube channel. And for continued coverage of local news, community events, and updates on Providence elections, we encourage everyone to subscribe to the Providence Eye. That's pvdi.org, not providenceeye.org, unless you're looking for LASIK surgery. And stay connected with the work we are doing to keep residents informed. Additional information about the Eye and future City Council forums is available here at this front table. Again, this is we have 3 more forums, so if you know anyone in any of the wards remaining, please share the word, spread the word. And also, don't forget to access our bilingual voters guide, which features candidates' answers to questions and customized ballots for each voter. Additionally, coverage of this forum and all other City Council candidate forum races will be available on our website, pvdi.org. Thank you again to all our candidates, and our audience, and everyone who contributed to making tonight's forum possible. We hope this conversation provided voters with valuable information as they prepare to make their decisions in the upcoming primary on September 9th. Have a safe evening, and thank you for joining us.